All right, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Monarchs Tribunal. Today, with me, coming onto my show for the first time, I have no idea what your name is from the Still Loading podcast.
It's Josh. It's Josh. That's a hell of an intro, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
This is a professionally run operation here.
Hey, in your defense, you messaged me a while ago. I didn't even ask your name. What is your name?
I am Mike.
There we go. Mike and hey, my brother's name is Mike. So you know what? There's already some familiarity with that.
I think this is like the third show I've had to start out like that because I realized I didn't know my guest's real name.
It's funny, man. Like when you start collaborating with other podcasters, it's so easy to be like, "Hey, I like your work. Let's collaborate." And almost every podcaster, unless they're a jerk, is like, "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And then I'll set something up, and I'll be like, "Oh, by the way, how do I pronounce your name?" That's like always the last thing that I ask. I'm like, "How do you say your name again?" Jim? Okay.
See, I'm so used to just thinking of people in terms of like the handles. Like
Yeah.
whenever I talk with a gamer looks at 40, Bill over from all that. I don't think his name's Bill. It's a gamer look at 40 is what's in my head.
I mean, with Bill, I had to get his. He was in my Final Fantasy draft from about a month ago or so. So I had to make sure I had his name. But yeah, thank you for inviting me on.
Problem. Now, typically with this show, I try to make sure I have a guest who comes at whatever our topic is from a slightly different angle, like either a different view on the game or show, or maybe they came into it in a different way. Like, whenever I get Bill back on, we're going to be talking with Jorah's Mask, where he played it much later. I played it when it came out. That said,
Hmm.
today me and you are talking The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, and I have no idea where this came from. I just wanted an excuse to talk about Wind Waker.
No, that's fair. The way I came about it was I remember going over to I had a friend growing up, friend in high school, and I'd actually go over to his house every single day after school. It was just we would hang out, we would play games for a little bit, and then I would go home and do homework and all that good stuff. So we hung out for quite some time. And when we first started hanging out, he had Wind Waker. His parents were very strict, like no violence in video games unless it's like cartoon violence or violence against like robots or some shit. So he was not allowed to play, like anything. So they got him a GameCube because that had the most family friendly option, right? Now he loved Wind Waker, and when I first saw it, I was like, "Man, why do you like it so much?" I was very much in that hipsterish camp back when, because one of the big quote unquote big quotation marks controversies around this game was that it was its art style. Everyone wanted a realistic art style because of the Space World 2001 or 2000 tech demo that Nintendo showed when they announced the GameCube. So everyone was like losing their mind about this realistic looking Zelda, and then you get Wind Waker. And so Wind Waker obviously was cell shaded, these cartoon graphics, beautiful cell shading and cartoon graphics. But I remember being like, man, that's not cool. I wanted a realistic, I wanted this gritty looking Zelda. So watching him play, I'm like, why do you like Wind Waker, man? Look at those graphics. That's just silly. I very much in that mainstream camp of being like, this is dumb because the graphics aren't what I was expecting them to be. In retrospect, that was very flawed logic, very stupid logic. But, I was also like a teenager and very opinionated, and it took me a while to, kind of get over myself a little bit. I watched him play it, and then I started playing it, and I actually ended up really enjoying it. I did actually like the game even after I shat all over it for a little bit, and then then I actually kind of sat down and gave it a shot. And I was playing it at his house, and I was going to say this is like 2006, maybe like 2005, 6, maybe 7. I'm going to guess between like '06 and '07, somewhere around there. And I never beat it at his house. I got pretty far though. I think where I got stuck at was the Triforce shards, because that is much more difficult on the GameCube version as opposed to the Wii U version. That's about where I stopped, and I kind of didn't touch it for a number of years. And then I finally saw the Wii U version come out, and I remember I had tried to restart the game a few times, got up to the same point again with the Triforce shards, and was like, nah, fuck this, man. It's annoying. Got the Wii U version, got the HD remake. I want to say I played that in like 2014, 2015, and then I finally beat it and I loved it. Looking back now, I think this is one of the most beautiful games, just period. Yes, in terms of graphical fidelity, it's not high realism, but that's, art direction to me is more important than fidelity or like levels of realism or anything like that. Like, this is one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen.
Whereas with me, I got it about the time it came out, and I immediately loved the game. I was never really big on like the more realistic end of graphics anyway. I've always
Hmm.
liked the more colorful stuff. So Wind Waker played right to what I would have wanted out of a game.
So you're a man of culture, I see. You're someone
Yep.
who actually has like well-rounded opinions as opposed to me being a teenager being like, it's not realistic, guys." I was also obsessed with Medal of Honor, and when I saw Medal of Honor Frontline on the PS2 and how realistic it looked to me at the time, I was just like blown away. And then I see Wind Waker, I'm like, "This looks nothing like it." Like, man, Medal of Honor looks so much better, even though you can't compare the two at all, both in terms of gameplay and art styles. And now you go back and look at Medal of Honor Frontline and you look at Wind Waker, and Wind Waker still looks fucking great.
Yeah, that was an early criticism a lot of people had of Wind Waker that did not hold up. That game is aged exceptionally well.
Yeah, Wind Waker, and not even in just in terms of graphics, man. I think the gameplay of this game is still really solid.
I will say one issue a lot of people had that does still hold up is sailing can feel like it takes ages sometimes.
They did address that a little bit in the HG remake,
Yeah.
where they had like the super sail or the speed sail or whatever it's called. You don't have to constantly change the direction of the wind when you're using that sail, which is really nice. It definitely helps a lot. There's a lot of quality of life improvements that they made in the remake. I was watching a video on the game earlier today, and the one guy, you know what? I'm gonna find the YouTube channel so I can at least give the dude credit for this observation. But it's funny, there's a lot of sailing, there's a lot of water, it's oceans everywhere. It's weird that for a game that's all about sailing in water, there's like no swimming. Like you can't. There's like you can only swim for a short amount of time, and there's no underwater stuff.
Huh.
PG Reviews, that's the YouTube channel. He had a video all about it and it was really good. Really enjoyed what I didn't get to finish it. It's like an hour long, but I was watching him like pretty solid video, but he made that observation. I'm like, "You're right. For a game all about sailing, why is there no underwater things at all?"
I mean, technically you go underwater, but it's not really underwater
But it's
stuff.
not like an underwater level.
It's effectively no different than any other dungeon.
Yo, when that happened though, that blew my fucking mind in terms of like story.
How early in life did you actually get into Zelda?
My first Zelda was Ocarina of Time, like a lot of 90s kids growing up with an N64. I remember though being really disinterested in Zelda at first just because of the cover art for it. Like the cover art for Ocarina of Time is very simplistic. It is just a shield, a sword, and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's the Master Sword and the Hylian shield or whatever. And I remember seeing that at Blockbuster. Shout out to Blockbuster, and being like, "Why is this game so popular? Why?" Like I could, because it had like the branding, 1998 Game of the Year. It had that like little blurb on it that Nintendo used as an advertising thing on the box. And I always remember being like, "Why? Like, how is this a game of the year? Look at this box art. It looks so silly." So what you're learning about like a very young Josh is that I was very illiterate, like media illiterate. I'm like, "What do you mean Wind Waker looks good? What are you talking about?" Really had these like I was very sure of my opinions, even no matter how wrong they were. But then I remember finally renting it from Blockbuster and being like, "Holy shit, I was not expecting this at all." I actually fell in love with Ocarina of Time to the point I don't really enjoy playing the game anymore because I almost like I burnt myself out on it from playing it so much as a kid. Like even to this day, I replayed it last year. After I finished replaying it, I was like, this was still okay, but man, it does not hold up the way I remember it. I now if I'm going for an N64 Zelda, I much prefer Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask is fantastic, man. I love that game. But yeah, and that was my first foray into the Zelda franchise. It was Ocarina of Time. My one buddy Jamie always jokes around because he hasn't played any Zelda since Link to the Past. He actually has a sealed copy of Wind Waker that he has refused to open. He plans on selling it at some point. But he made the point. The reason he stopped is because he played Ocarina of Time. And if you look at the story of Ocarina, it's basically just a Link to the Past just repeated, just slightly, slightly changed. When he saw that, he's like, "This is stupid," and then never played it, and never played another Zelda game, which his loss, but still, it was a funny observation. And so now, a combination of that and just like the game, just I don't know what it is. The game Ocarina of Time just doesn't do it for me anymore. I respect it for its historical importance, but just on a personal enjoyment level, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. But Wind Waker, man, it's still like holy shit. I don't play it. I don't play Zelda in general that often, not for any particular reason, but they're usually big time investments. And I'm a dad and I host a podcast, so I have to really manage my time. But I love Wind Waker. I think it's low key one of the best open, like a early example of a solid open world game that I almost feel like no one talks about enough at how that it's an actually like a true open world game, especially back for that era.
Now, me, I started a bit earlier. I did start with Link to the Past. Also had a friend with an NES, so I played a fair bit of the original. It's also one of the big reasons I wanted a 64 to begin with. Now, when I played Ocarina, like, it was really good. But I'm like, Link to the Past is still better.
I think Link to the Past doesn't quite hit me as hard just because I think that if you grew up with Link to the Past, then your imagination filled in a lot of the gaps that the graphics couldn't show and that kind of stuff. I went back to it later on. When I first played Link to the Past, I'd already played like Wind Waker and Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, all these games that like have these open worlds to an extent. And I guess I take back a little bit what I was saying about Wind Waker being an early open world game. A lot of Zeldas are kind of open worldish. Wind Waker just feels more open than that. But anyway, that's a different topic. What I was going to say was like Link to the Past still it just didn't have that same sense of grandeur to me that maybe other games had. And I think a lot of that just has to be like I did not get to play it when it was contemporary. I missed out on that part of gaming. And sometimes it sucks. Sometimes there's experiences that you will just never be able to get just because you did not get to experience it during a formative year, like during your formative years.
I like to think I'm at least somewhat really good at being able to appreciate things before my time. Like, I can go back and play Mother from the NES, the original
Mm-hmm.
Earthbound. Won't get into that whole story here, but close to when the fan translation for Mother 3 came out is when I'd also first played the original Mother, and I think that's the best RPG on the NES. Like, I'll take that over the Final Fantasy RPGs on the NES.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Mother is a really good game.
I'd say that I can do the same, like kind of put myself in that time period and like appreciate something for when it came out. But like like I very much separate like was it good for the time and do I enjoy it now? Like those are two different metrics. I've played lots of games that I don't necessarily enjoy, but I can acknowledge like, hey, like a perfect example. Now I did enjoy this game, so I don't want it to make it sound like that. But you're talking about Mother, Earthbound. Like I played through Earthbound, and it was fun. But I had heard this. This is a groundbreaking RPG. This is amazing. This is so good. And I played it. I'm like, this is a really well made, competently made, and pretty decent RPG. I don't think I'll ever play it again. Like, I'm happy I got to experience it, but like, it's not something that I would go back and play willingly unless it was for the podcast. Chrono Trigger, that's a different story. I played Chrono Trigger and I was blown away by that. That still, I think, holds up
Oh,
like
I've
really, really
recently
well.
just did another replay of Chrono Trigger. Like, I
It
will play that game to death every so often.
It is so 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 good, but that is a good point you bring up because like if you're when you're trying to look at a game like there is like a lot of people say, oh, that game sucks. I'm like, well, does it suck because you're not enjoying it now? Like, what if you played it back when it was like, say you were 8 years old and just experienced like learning about games for the first time? That game probably would have blown your goddamn mind because you had nothing else to compare it to. Going playing it as an adult or even like a young 20 something, you already have a couple of years of gaming under your belt. On top of that, if you're playing only contemporary games, you're whether it's Fortnite or whether it's let's go with Tears of the Kingdom or what have you, whatever big game you want to put think of right now. Yeah, going back to Link to the Past isn't going to have the same like holy shit factor to you because you're experiencing something that has a lot more polished. I shouldn't even say polished. Link to the Past has a lot of polish, but its presentation is a lot more modern, and you're going to be a lot more accustomed to it. With Link to the Past, like I can look at it and be like, this was a fun enough game. Like I had a good time with it, but it didn't feel like this epic grand adventure how people who grew up with it describe it. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. That's only because I didn't grow up with it. Like if I grew up with it, that game would be like in my blood.
I will say though, in
And
relation to Earthbound, when I first
mm,
played that as a kid, I did not like that game like at all. As
it's a
I get
weird game, man.
as I get older, I love it now.
There's stuff that game does that I wish games would do now. You know, like if you run into an enemy that you're so over leveled that it doesn't matter,
It
it
just
just
destroys it.
automatically ends it. Yeah, like I wish they would do shit like that. It still gives you like an experience point.
Or like the
Like
rolling HP system. I've never seen another game do that.
yeah, that's super
It's so
interesting.
weird.
To get back to Wind Waker, with Wind Waker, that game I still think like both in terms of when it came out and even today, I think it holds up really well. Like it still controls well even on a GameCube controller. You know, using the weird C stick for like camera angles and shit like
Oh, I
that.
love the GameCube controller. That's my favorite one.
Oh, it's super comfy. It is not good for for dual joystick controls. And that's
Yeah.
fine. You know, there's games that the good games work around that. Why do you think Metroid Prime plays so well? Because they designed around that limitation. Why do you think Smash and Luigi's Mansion and Mario Sunshine they all play really well because Nintendo designed around that limitation. So it can be done. It's just like if you're trying to play Halo on a GameCube, it's going to be a little bit tricky.
Oh yeah, it's also like trying to play a fighting game on an Xbox.
Oh,
It,
because their D-pad is so bad,
it's
right?
even just the placement of the D-pad feels a little weird.
Hmm.
Like it's odd. Like the PlayStation controller, much better for fighting games. That Xbox controller, so much better for a shooter.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I guess so.
Just switching that joystick and D-pad does so much.
But yeah, Wind Waker, I loved it on the GameCube, man. I loved playing it. It's so fucking good.
Now, in terms of difficulty, how do you think Wind Waker actually compares to the others? Because I wouldn't call it one of the more difficult Zelda games.
No, I would say the hardest Zelda game is probably like the original, or like obviously Link or Zelda 2, Link's Adventure or whatever the fuck for the NES.
Yeah.
Like those two, I would say are probably a lot harder. And Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is actually a little difficult in a good way. Like I think it's like a very fair challenge.
I
But
actually
like Wind
thought they were
Waker,
way too easy.
really.
Yeah, I had no
Uh,
issues with
I
Breath of the
didn't have an
Wild.
issue once I got used to the combat mechanics, but those enemies, like if you let them hit you, they will kick your ass, especially early on. I think early on that game is a lot more difficult. Not that it needs to be. I actually think it's perfect, but I shouldn't say perfect. I think
See,
it's
on
really
one
good,
hand, I
but
could see, but I also had like a Dark Souls esque mentality. It's like, all right, this thing's hard. I'll just start skirting everything. It's like I don't care. I don't need to fight everything out here.
see, I always fight everything. I can't, I'm not a Dark Souls
Yeah,
fan. So when it comes to like that type of thing, I have to really enjoy the game to get into it. And
yeah,
luckily I really enjoyed Breath of the Wild. But I'm with you on that. I think Wind Waker is not that hard of a game at all. It's a fun game, but it's
yeah,
not the most, I would say it's more, the platforming is more challenging than the actual combat or anything.
yeah. As far as difficulty goes, this is kind of where I'm at with the game. I need you to be just hard enough to feel like I'm having to put in effort. If I feel like I'm not putting in effort, I wonder why I'm playing.
For me, it doesn't have to meet that, but you have to give me another reason then. Is the story good enough that the lower difficulty doesn't bother me? Or is the gameplay loop mechanic like fun enough that it doesn't bother me that I'm not being challenged? Like is like the kinetic tactile feel of either hitting the button on the controller and seeing the visceral sensation you get from when you perform whatever it is. Like for example, if you play like Doom 2016 or something like that, even on the easiest settings and the easiest enemies, it's very satisfying to just shoot the shit out of an enemy as you're like going through real fast. So even if the difficulty is easy, if the gameplay feels satisfying, and that's all
Yeah,
on a personal level. Not everyone's
yeah.
gonna, that's just personal preference. What's satisfying to you versus someone else. Wind Waker, I think, feels very satisfying. Like it's definitely an
Oh yeah.
easy game, but like the combat is very satisfying.
Like I don't think I'd even put any Zelda game I've played close to being so easy that it feels like I'm not putting in the effort. Breath of the Wild, I think, is one of the easiest ones for me. That
Really,
said, even just avoiding those stronger enemies, I'm still having to like think, plan ways around. Just make
you
me feel
know,
like I need to be there for this game to be finished. That's
that's a good
all.
way to describe difficulty. I like that. Make it feel like I need to be there for this game to finish. That's a really I like that way to describe it. I mean, also a sense of satisfaction. Like, if something's really difficult, do you feel satisfied after did you feel accomplished? Like, one of the reasons I don't know if I'll ever enjoy Dark Souls games and stuff is like, I've tried them. Like, I played the first Dark Souls game, I got to like the Bell Gargoyles or whatever. I beat them. And after I beat them, I'm like, that was a waste of my life. At
Yeah.
no point did I feel like, when I finally beat them, it wasn't this sense of satisfaction. It was a sense of like, fucking finally, that was stupid.
That's me with Monster Hunter. I just accepted I can't do Monster Hunter.
It took me forever to realize why I dislike it, dislike Dark Souls, and that I think that's what it is. There's just no satisfaction in beating the bosses, and if that's you don't get that, that's kind of the entire point of the difficulty, to feel that satisfaction of overcoming something super challenging. And when I did overcome the something that's challenging, I just didn't care. With Wind Waker, like all the bosses are, especially the final boss, man. Like Ganon is such a satisfying fight.
Oh, that was great. I even liked the
Hmm.
puppet Ganon fight shortly before, even though I don't know why you're fighting a giant puppet Ganon.
Why not? That's what I say. Why not?
Now, as far as the story of Wind Waker, it's an interesting one to talk about because in a lot of ways, I don't think Wind Waker has as many great moments as other Zelda games that I really like.
You don't think it has as many great moments?
I could walk through the whole story in my head and what happens, but the actual details of the plot don't really stick with me outside of really that fight with Ganon is one of the best fights with Ganon in the series.
See, like, so I wouldn't say I'm a gigantic Zelda fan, and what I mean by that is I have never beaten Twilight Princess, which I know a lot of people love. I've tried it, and I didn't really enjoy it all that much. The wolf mechanic
Yeah.
just did not do it for me. It felt it I don't know. I'm gonna give it another shot. Like it was one of those ones where like I could tell like maybe I just wasn't vibing with it at the right time. I'm a big proponent of like trying games at different stages, like trying games you didn't like before at different stages of your life. Because like for example, right now I've been playing through Skyrim for the first time. I've tried that game 6 or 7 times, and every time I'm like, this game is fucking stupid. I don't understand why people like it. And now I'm playing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, all I want to do is play it. I don't want to edit my podcast at all. I just want to play it. So I'm hoping that in a couple years, I'll go back to Twilight Princess and I'll be like, oh, this is why everyone likes it.
I
And
will
then
say
I'll,
it's kind of funny. Twilight Princess matched more of what you would have expected out of a Zelda game, apparently.
well, in
With
what
the
way?
different graphical style, darker
Oh,
tones,
yeah, yeah,
compared to
totally.
Wind Waker's bright, colorful, cartoonish stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And now I play, but now I play it. I'm like, this is awful. I hate this so much.
Well, see, I really remember when that game came out. That is like Twilight Princess when those initial screenshots came out is the first time people realized how strong the GameCube actually was as a system.
Yeah.
People kind of forget this. It had stronger specs than the Xbox did. It was the strongest system that generation.
I believe you're right.
It's just
I don't know. I thought Xbox might have been slightly more power. I don't remember that. I don't know the specs off the top of my head, so I'll just trust you on that. But either way, that and one of the reasons why Nintendo hasn't tried to do something similar, it's because they tried to, Sony's always going for the power console, and so that's what Nintendo did with the GameCube, and it didn't work for them. So they have gone a different route ever since. And yeah, like late era GameCube games are wildly good looking for their time.
that was never really the focus of Nintendo's games. Is the thing like even though it was the strongest system, they didn't treat it that way. But then Twilight Princess screenshots came out. They're like, why wasn't everything this good looking? Yet, funnily enough, Wind Waker is the one that's now better remembered than Twilight Princess, I think.
Well, the Twilight Princess also they had like that weird, awkward, partial Wii version of it as well, which had like really bad
the
really
motion
bad
controls.
motion controls. And they obviously fixed. I never played Skyward Sword either, to be fair, so
That's
I
the
can't
one I
tell.
haven't played yet.
I've heard it. They've fixed. It's a lot better than people give it credit for. But yeah, I mean, I've played. I never beat the original Zelda. Never played Zelda 2, but I've beaten Links to the Past, Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker. I've played a pretty large chunk of Twilight Princess, beat Breath of the Wild. So I guess I've beaten more than I expected. Oh, I also beat what is it? The first DS game, Phantom Hourglass. I really liked that one too. To back what you were saying, like in terms of like how does its story compare to others? I actually think Wind Waker has out of the ones I've played, I think Wind Waker has like the strongest story because the whole thing of the characters are actually pretty strong in this. Generally, Link is kind of a boring character, but they give him
Yeah.
a little bit more of a personality in this with the fact that like he doesn't know he's the hero. He is just this kid from this small island and he acts like a kid from a small island. You can get like once again, I'm going to shout out PG Reviews. You mentioned like how the best healing item in the game is your grandma's soup, so it kind of reinforces like the whole family ties narrative of it. Like the familial portion of the narrative to it. With you trying to rescue your sister, it gives Link a lot more personal stakes in the adventure as opposed to other Zelda games, which is just this is your destiny, you must do this. With Wind Waker, I can say, at least from my own perspective, not just taking a point from PG reviews, when you go to that underwater section you talked about before, the dungeon that's underwater, and you find out that like you're going into old Hyrule, the Hyrule from spoiler alert for those who haven't played Wind Waker, the Hyrule from Ocarina of Time, and you find out that it's been frozen in time. The ship that's been talking to you the whole time, the King of Red Lions, is the actual former king of Hyrule. That plot twist just blew my fucking mind. They even tried to give
Yeah.
Ganondorf more like character building. The
It
fact
was the
that like
best Ganondorf from the series.
not every moment may be memorable. I think that Wind Waker has more character building than other Zeldas, and that's why to me it's more memorable.
See, I would call Wind Waker probably my second favorite Zelda game. Even though, as I mentioned before, I don't think it had like nearly as memorable story moments as many of the others, but at the same time, I think unlike most other Zelda games, it never doesn't feel like you're on this grand adventure through the world. Like other ones, they'll have like downtimes. It may not be hitting quite as hard. The feeling doesn't leave from beginning to end of that game, and
Hmm.
it's kind of hard to put into words why that is. I think in
I
part it's
think
because of the visual design. It always
visual
looks
design,
grand and beautiful.
the soundtrack too, man. The soundtrack, it like that.
Oh, it's so good. So simple, but so good.
It's very simplistic, but it completely captures the mood. It feels vaguely piratey, but not quite, even because it's got a more pirate theme later on. I think what works about Wind Waker so much is that the world is so big that it can take. They do have some fast travel options, but it takes a while to sail around. I think because it's so big and the islands are so kind of like random, I understand the whole game's been charted by fans. And like, if you really want to, you can dig into every little bit of it and find out every nook and cranny and find every secret in there. But, I've played this game two or three times now, beaten it once, but played it two or three times and gotten pretty far into it, and it still feels like there's shit that I have not explored. Like I still feel like I could sail and find an island that I've never found before, even though I know that's probably not possible because I've been to so many of the different islands. I've completed the entire map, so yeah, I've seen quote unquote every island, but I feel like there's hidden ones out there that I just don't know about. Like there is so much to do and to look at, and it kind of brings back that sense of wonder and whimsy that you feel when you were a kid when you're first getting into video games and you don't really understand. When you're a kid playing video games, you don't understand video game logic just yet. So you like walk into walls being like, can I walk through this if I walk into it enough? You know what I mean? Like you have all that broken logic that, obviously as an experienced gamer, you wouldn't have because you've played enough games to know what to do. It's funny, I'll play games in front of my wife, and she'll be like, "Why don't you go down that hallway?" I'm like, "Oh, there's nothing down there." And she'll go, "Well, how do you know?" I'm like, "Well, based off of this, this, and this, I can usually like, if anything, there's a collectible down there, and I don't really care about a collectible right now, so it doesn't matter." And she's just like, "I just don't understand how you can just be so sure." I could be wrong. There's probably moments that I've been wrong, but I've still beaten the game and I haven't missed anything. So
Oh, it's
it
weird how much people seem to forget isn't innate knowledge. That when you've been playing games for so long, you just yeah, of course this is how it is. I don't need a tutorial. I don't need a guide. I just know.
along that same line of logic, there's almost like Zelda logic. Like I feel like Zelda games have a very strict line of logic. Like in one other game, you have to be taught it somehow when you get into Zelda, right? But in one other game, can you see a bunch of you'll walk into a room in a dungeon and you'll see a bunch of torch sconces, not lit, or torches not lit, but one is does have fire. You automatically know, I'm like, all right, got to grab my stick and I'm going to light the rest of these. You just know that's what you have to do. That is like an instinctive knowledge that the games have taught you, that this is just what they do, what you do in Zelda. It's funny because when someone first comes across that, when they're first getting into Zelda, they're like, why? I don't understand what to do in this room. Once it becomes Zelda logic, then it makes sense. But I remember when I was in college, I went to school for game design and simulation, and my video game design teacher was like, I can't do Zelda games because I just don't understand their logic. That was such an interesting point. I had never heard anyone say that before. And ever since he said that, I'm like, oh, I wonder if, maybe Zelda has weird logic too. And I guess it does to some people.
Oh, another weird example of something like that. My nephew, he got a hold of one of those like little portable systems that you can like plug NES games into to play. But he was trying out the very first Final Fantasy for the first time. I was like, he had not a knight. It's like, what can you do with a knight? I'm like, oh, you just go buy weapons for him. It's like, so he went in. He tried to buy some weapons for all of his guys. He's like, why can't the white mage equip the sword? In my head, I'm like, it's the white mage. It can't equip. This isn't fundamental knowledge. You learn
It
this
is
stuff.
it's really funny how that works. And yeah, video game logic is something that you just end up learning, and it informs so much more of it, that it's just funny when, like you said, when non-gamers look at it, they're like, I don't understand how you knew this or how you figured this out. It's just like we've been trained well by our developer overlords.
But yeah, I want to get back to a point before we got sidetracked onto that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you mentioned like every time you go back and play Windwaker, you feel like you're going to discover something new. The first thing I thought of, random as this is, random song that came out from one of those VTubers. There's a great line that sums that up. Even if it's been done, I don't remember when. Let it feel like the first time again.
That's a good way to think about it. I like that.
A New Start by Nana Shimune. Just Wind Waker just has that feel. It doesn't matter how many
Hmm.
times you jump back to it. It just feels fresh and exciting.
There's always something new. I always feel like there's a side quest that I've never tried before. And like Zelda, especially since it really kind of started with, at least for me, I know that it might have started earlier with everyone else, but at least for me, with Ocarina of Time, how like there's side quests you can only complete at night, and different things that you had to do on different time frames, and then obviously Majora's Mask really kicked it into gear with the 3-day time limit, and how like especially like the Lover's Mask, Anju and
Oh god,
what
the Lover's Mask.
yeah, like
And
that thing where you have to
Kefka?
do so
Not
many
Kefka.
specific things. Not yeah, not
It's
Kefka.
very
I forget
similar
the
to
dude.
Kefka, the name.
But you have to do all those very specific things on. You have to go to at 1 o'clock on the first day. You have to do this, and then at 3 o'clock on the second day, you have to do this,
You
and there
screw
it's
up
more to
once,
it
you
than
have
that.
to start the whole thing over.
Dude, I was at the final thing. I made it all the way to the final day, and I ran out of time trying to escape from the dungeon with the lover's mask. I fucking didn't get it. So then I had to redo the whole thing. I remember that as a kid. I was so mad. I'm like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I ended up getting it later on when I replayed the game on the 3DS. But in Wind Waker, it really kind of continues that vibe of every island, especially when what's the island? Is it like Onset Island or Windfall Island? on Windfall, I always feel like there's some shit that you can do, whether it's at the auction house, there's always stuff happening like in the town at night. I really love how there it just feels like there's always something to do in Wind Waker, whether it's on Windfall Island or Dragon Roost Island. But yeah, I love shit like that. I always thought that was really cool. It just felt like bigger than it actually was. It looms larger in my mind. I do also love, and speaking of islands, you can buy your own personal island, the private
I
oasis.
completely forgot about that.
You can buy your own little getaway island. It's pretty cool.
I also love is like all the islands. Like you don't have to explore a good chunk of those islands. They're just there to discover.
Yeah, they're just there for you to find at your leisure, or if you just want to. There were some islands that had like a logic to it, like especially the three triangle islands that would like that the northern triangle island and the southern or what that you have to place the orbs on to summon the Tower of the Gods and whatnot. Once you found one, then you could kind of infer where the rest were. I think they mark them on the map for you too, which is definitely obviously helpful. But it all makes sense. Like you could probably figure it out once you got the first or second one. But then just how like they open up the Tower of the Gods. Also, when you find Tingle's Island, like this was the North American. No, sorry, Majora's Mask was the North American introduction to Tingle, but everyone really got to know Tingle from this game.
I still don't know if I love or hate
Oh.
Tingle. Years later.
Did you did you ever see the Tingle only game for the DS? It was a game where you played as Tingle, but it only came out in Japan.
I heard about it, and then I stopped looking up information on it. Like, nope. I have found
Uh,
my limit as a Zelda fan.
I don't blame you. That's probably for the best.
I still don't know what that game's like.
Neither do I. I've never touched it, but I've always been very curious.
What other thoughts do you have on Wind Waker?
I mean, we could talk about the different bosses. There's also the items. One of the coolest items in out of all of Zelda, just period, is the grappling hook. It serves so many different purposes, whether it's to climb up the sides of cliffs or to swing, or you use it as a way to pull up treasure from the bottom of the ocean. And the swinging, like the kinetic feeling of Link swinging, always felt really good to me. I always thought that was really cool.
I did like that
Yeah.
game finding new uses for some of the old items like that.
Well, was there grappling hook in earlier games?
Yeah, Link to the Past had introduced the grappling hook, I believe.
Did it?
Yeah.
I was thinking that was the hook shot.
Okay, now you're just being pedantic. Grappling hook and hook shot are the same thing.
Well, I mean, but they do different things. The hook shot pulled you across a gap.
It also grabbed items.
It also grabbed items. That's fair. I guess I guess the grappling hook is this game's version of the hook shot. The only reason I guess I separate them so much in my mind, I'm not saying I'm correct, it just I'm separating it in my mind, is literally the kinetic motion that it does. Even when you get the hook shot in like Ocarina of Time, it just propels you across in a straight line. With the grappling hook, you can swing on it, you can change directions, you can use it to climb up to the very top of something. Versus the hook shot, it felt like it was a little bit more limited to line of sight. Where this, as long as you could grapple it, then you could swing around edges and whatnot. Granted, line of sight, I guess, is not the best argument because you still need to see the hook in order to throw the grapple. For me, I just for some reason I just differentiate the two so much because I feel like in terms of gameplay mechanics, it just feels so different.
I think fundamentally they're still kind of the same, just the bigger variety that they did with that gravel hook than what you would see in the hook shots. It's one of those things, it's a small addition, but it's a small addition that makes a big difference.
I would agree with you on that.
Contrast to Twilight Princess's double hook shot.
Twilight Princess, I think the reason why I couldn't get into it as much is that it very much felt like the epitome of the rinse, wash, repeat nature of the Zelda formula. You get an item, you use that item for that dungeon, and then you generally don't use the item all that much after you finish with that dungeon.
See, most Zelda games I think do really well with that. Like, you'll keep using a lot of those items for different things, but Twilight Princess got bad with it. Gear that hook into the walls.
That's the worst of it. I agree with you. I think prior to this, like Zelda games were pretty good at reusing them. You know, especially Link to the Past. Link to the Past, you reused a lot of the ones from previous dungeons. But as the series went on, it felt like they were utilizing less and less the items you got in the dungeon outside of that specific dungeon. Like you still like the grappling hook you use everywhere and stuff like that. But like, and actually for the most part, if I go back to the items, let me just see here. Yeah, I mean, in this, you almost always use all of these grappling hook, the boomerang, the skull hammer, because you use
Bombs
the
and
skull hammer to
arrows.
like bombs, arrows, Deku Leaf you use a lot, hook shot. There, whoa, I forgot. There was a hook shot in Wind Waker.
Did they have both a hook shot and a grappling hook?
That seemed wait. Apparently, I don't rem. I am
Huh.
completely blanking on it.
So
Um,
that's what I
see, like
said.
that's
There's a
what I'm.
lot of things about this game that are easy to forget, but
In the wind, this is from the wiki. In the Wind Waker, the hookshot is located in the Wind Temple, where Link can obtain it after defeating the mini boss, the Summoning Wizrobe. The hookshot functions similarly as in previous 3D installments, just like before. A red dot, blah 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 blah. The hookshot can be used differently with the Iron Boots. If Link equips both items simultaneously, he becomes heavy and does not get pulled towards the object. Because of this, the hookshot gives Link a stronger pull in objects, allowing for them to be moved toward him. So yeah, and you use the hookshot to free Makar, the little Dooku seedling from the Wind Temple. So there we go. Yeah, there is a hookshot in the Wind Waker. So I was right.
they still function very similarly.
They do. They definitely do. I'm not even going to try to pretend otherwise. Oh, there's also all the different little collectibles like the spoils, you know, the golden feathers, the joy pendants, the knight's crests, the skull necklaces, Boko Baba seeds. There's just so much.
Another thing I do like because it came back in the most recent couple of Zelda games is being able to pick up and use enemy weapons.
Your Moblin Spear, your Stalfos clubs, Phantom Ganon sword if you want to use that.
I know a lot of people really didn't like that aspect of like Tears of the Kingdom, and I really liked having to rely on weapons you found.
Hated it at first. I was one of the people that hated it, mainly because they just broke so easily.
See, on one hand, I agree, but okay, I'm gonna have to share a frustration I had with Breath of the Wild. I
Go
avoided
for it.
any information I had that was on Breath of the Wild because I knew I was going to buy it, and I like to kind of go into a
Hmm.
game just as fresh as possible with as little information as possible. It turns out that guy, I forget what the guy is called that you turn the Korok seeds into. I didn't travel to that town to get the camera, and he only appears there the very first time. I made it through virtually the entirety of Breath of the Wild the first time without ever upgrading my inventory slots because I didn't even know that was an option.
Oh my God.
that,
Wow.
that was a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
That
I
said,
guess
with a
that's
few
what
extra
kind of like
slots, it'd be fine.
I guess that's kind of the risk that the game devs took, you know, where it's like if you if you give players that much agency, then there is a chance that they are going to miss things that you make. And it's crazy that, you know, you can miss something that big.
So
But
much of that
yeah.
game I'd cleared out by that point. I'm like, what are you
Yep.
doing this to me, game? I like you. Why do you hate me?
The closest thing that ever happened like that to me was it's funny. I was talking about I'm getting into Skyrim. Years ago, I played Morrowind. You know, Elder Scrolls 3. Rage quit that game because I was on a mission. I had some quest and I had to find this one specific like potion or item or something like that. They tell me where to go. I find the dungeon, go into the dungeon, and I can't find it. I clear out the entire thing. Enemies way higher level than me. I had to really be tricky and like use a lot of kind of like, you know, shoot them with an arrow and then run the fuck away and then go back when they couldn't see me and shoot them and run the fuck away. That kind of like I had to really do a lot of kiting and all that stuff. And it took a long time for me to clear out the dungeon and I still couldn't find it. So I looked up online. I think that was even back in the day when my family didn't have like high speed internet, so I might have had to go to the library or I had to ask my parents, "Hey, can like we had high speed internet, but it still took up our phone line. So I was like, "Hey, can I use the internet right now?" Only to find out that that stupid fucking item is in the beginning of the whole dungeon. The dungeon has a cave, and then it like there's a split level. There's a bottom half of the dungeon, and then a stairwell up to the, like basically it's a small tunnel. It comes out to a big room in the cave system, and the room is big enough that you can literally see like they carved like a balcony into the top portion. So there's a door on the lower level, and then a door up top on the balcony, and steps going up there. If that makes sense. On a shelf on the second level, on the balcony on the second level in that big cave room, which was the very fucking beginning of, like, I would probably say maybe like 30 feet into the dungeon from what I remember. Like, it was not far. That's when I'm like, okay, game, this is fucking bullshit. If you're going to make me find a random object on a shelf that's filled with other fucking objects, you need to make it fucking apparent. Or you need to put it in a spot where it's like in a chest that's easy to like get to, like, don't fucking do that to me. And I was mad about it ever since. Now I'm finally enjoying Skyrim, but man, leading up to it, I was not a happy camper.
Oh, I can tell you the moment in Skyrim that initially pissed me off. Like, I don't remember the dungeon. But you have something I've heard people refer to as the Bethesda exit, where you'll leave a dungeon in a Bethesda game, and there'll be like an exit near the end that lets you out somewhere you otherwise couldn't have gotten to. Just so you
Yeah.
don't have to trek back through the whole thing. It's like, okay, I get that. Here's what pissed
Yep.
me off. I make a joke, like, after exiting the storm, like I can just hop down. Like, I could have gotten right here to where I needed to be if there was a ladder. I jumped down, buried in the snow immediately in front of that ledge is a ladder that if you'd have just grabbed it and picked it up, if the game would let you, you could have just went right to where you needed in that dungeon.
Oh, and the game doesn't even let you pick it up, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
But the
That's just
ladder's
adding
right
insult.
there! The door's
That's
right
just
there!
adding insult to injury, man.
I was so mad.
Yeah, I would
Like,
be too.
irrationally so. It wasn't even a hard dungeon, or like a particularly long or grueling one. But still.
Doesn't matter. I'd be pissed too, man. I don't think you're wrong for being mad about that. Fuck that.
It's not
Oh,
often I
man.
just out loud curse at a game like that. But I did it.
Periodically, if I'm streaming or something, my wife will hear me like getting pissed off at a game, and she'll be after I come to bed, and she'll be like, Do you like the game you're playing?" I'm like, "I do. It's fun." Anyway, we should probably talk about more Wind Waker. Bosses. Here's something else we can talk about. Bosses.
I don't
What
have strong memories of most of the bosses outside of fucking
really?
Ganon and Ganon. Yeah.
Oh man, like I have the list up in front of me, but I have like Mothula was really fun. The Big Octo is really good. I also really like, who's the dude? Is it Goma? I think it's Goma, the spider boss, which I believe you find in, oh my gosh, it's gonna drive me nuts. Dragon Roost Island. Yeah, it's like pulling on the great Balu's tail, the dragon tail, and you have to use the hook on Valu's tail to swing over Goma and in order to like get to the other side and like defeat it.
Okay, now that you bring it up, yes, I'm remembering that now.
That was a really, really fun one. Zelda bosses, I think, are always a lot of fun, but they can be hit or miss. Obviously, I enjoyed the bosses in this well enough, though. At the very least, I enjoyed the final Ganon fight. Is just insane. Like, it's such a good fight, especially compared to like other boss fights in some of the Zelda games, where like I thought the final boss in like Link to the or actually no, Breath of the Wild was a pretty good final boss. Actually, you know what? Majora's Mask. I fucking hate Majora's Mask final boss. I think that is like that's like Kingdom Hearts levels of like unnecessary versions of, like unnecessary forms.
I liked
Not as
it.
bad as Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts I counted one time. Kingdom Hearts 1 has like 6 different forms for the final boss.
Come on, it has to cap out at like 4, 5.
I'd have
I-
to double check, but
I think
I
you're
remember
probably right, actually.
I think I remember counting it was like 6 because it almost like mid form changes. I'm like, I don't know if I count these, but like it changes them patterns decently enough. Yeah, no, I like the bosses in this game though. Ganon's great. Goma's fun. Jalhalla, he's a boss in the Earth Temple. He has like like a flame lantern type of thing. I'm trying to remember what exactly how you fight him. It's been a minute
Yeah.
since I played it, but you have to use the mirror shield to defeat him.
As I said, like I think the fight with Ganon, it's probably my second favorite fight with Ganon in the series.
Especially the ending too. You know, like the actual animation, the
Uh,
cutscene of his defeat is insane.
oh, that was awesome. Like the only one I thought that beat it out was Twilight Princess. Like I wouldn't put Twilight Princess as one of the better Zelda games, even though I do like it. That was one of the greatest setups for like just the three-stage final fight because it makes use of all of like the core ideas and transformations from the game. Like you get the initial fight with him, then you get like the wolf showdown with Beast Ganon. Then after
Hmm.
everything's crumbled, it ends with the sword in a lot of ways like Wind Waker did. Like you have all the
I
big epic monster stuff, and then when everything's crumbling around you, it's just down to two guys with their swords.
Man, I'm gonna have to give Twilight Princess a shot at some point. I mean, I probably will cover it on the
Yeah,
show at some point, in the future. I just don't know when exactly. I'll have to set aside time for it. That's always the issue, man. That's always the issue
yeah.
is like I have to be able to set aside time
Man.
to be able to do it. But generally, I just try to like I'll stream on Tuesday and Thursday nights, or sorry, Tuesday and Saturday nights, just so that way I can have an excuse to like feel like I'm doing something for the podcast. But like sometimes I'm just gonna have to just do it for the sake of doing it and not actually trying to cover it on the show, you know?
It's alright, I know the feeling of trying to make time. I'm trying to catch up on One Piece.
That is
I am
that's an
700
interesting.
episodes in finally after about 3 years.
I have never watched One Piece before. Like I've
I
never
will sum
I
up One Piece like this: Oda, the guy who makes it, will occasionally columns in his manga just answering fan questions. And
mm,
somebody asked him a question one time. It's like, so you have all those scenes with Zoro fighting. He's the guy that has the three swords. One of them he has in his mouth, but he's
mm.
talking like, how does Zoro talk with a sword in his mouth? And Oda just answers, he speaks through his heart.
Oh God.
Now, as goofy as that sounds, that is so sincere for what you would expect out of One Piece. That
I
just
mean,
sums it all up right there.
I guess so. I'll have to watch. I used to watch a lot of anime too, and I just kind of I ended up stopping. Not just I don't know why. I have so many anime DVDs in my basement, and I have not touched them probably in at least 4 years.
Man, I still buy Blu-rays and DVDs. Screw all this
I
streaming. I want my physical media.
Hey man, eventually it's all like they can just take that shit away whenever they want. So buy it while you can.
There is no legal way to watch Queen Esmeralda's these days, except if you have the DVD like I do.
What is Queen Esmeralda's?
It's an anime that's part of all of the Harlock shows, like Galaxy
Oh,
Express, Harlock, Cosmo
okay.
Warrior Zero.
I actually have a Captain Harlock DVD. I don't know. I don't think I have the full series or anything like that.
There are so many
But
Harlock shows.
that's crazy. I had no idea actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, with Wind Waker, what would you say is one of your least favorite elements about it?
Honestly, it's what we mentioned earlier is sometimes how long travel can take. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that's even that big of an issue.
Do you enjoy the travel mechanic? Like the do you think sailing in the game is fun?
Yeah, to an extent. Again, it goes on a little too long, but I enjoy it.
I'm kind of with you on that. I especially like I mentioned the music before. Like if I can hear that theme and just sail, like I always like to do like try to do dramatic panoramic camera turns around it while the music is going to make it feel like I'm in some movie or like Game of Thrones like
Yeah. I think that really helps it, because even if it's not the most engaging sometimes, it just feels nice.
I think what's wild too is that to me the whole reason that feels nice is the art direction for the ocean is so strong. Like, how do you make an ocean interesting? It's, it's just water for miles and miles and miles. And it's not like they do crazy things with waves, because that would be really chaotic to pull off
Yeah.
with all the other stuff they have going on. I mean, they have waves sometimes, don't get me wrong, but not like it's not like you're gonna have to deal with a rogue wave in Wind Waker
You're not
unless
gonna
you're
get
gonna
hit
fight
with a
one of the
tsunami.
yeah, unless you're fighting an Octorok or one of those giant fucking I think it's an Oct yeah, the big
Yeah.
Octos. Um and but it like I think the art direction is so strong that when you are sailing on the ocean, it's just always visually interesting to look at,
Yeah.
which is crazy because there's not like there's always something happening. You might not even see a building or a tower on the horizon. You might not see anything, you know? You just might see just nothing but small waves, but it's still visually interesting enough that it still feels fun to travel. And that is a really hard thing to find the balance for. How do you make just movement with no type of kinetic energy fun? Like, yeah, it's kinetic in the sense that your character's moving, but if you think of like really fun movement in games, you think of Mario platformers, where like the it feels good just to make Mario jump and turn and slide and stuff like that. Or like if you ever play Celeste, that feels good to control. You ever play Sunset Overdrive on the Xbox One?
I wanted to, but I never wanted to buy an Xbox One.
That game is awesome. It's stupid fun. It's like the storyline is cuckoo bananas. It doesn't make any sense, but the movement mechanics are just so frenetic and fun, and it just you'll be grinding on a rail with just your regular ass shoes, and you'll jump off onto the hood of a car, which acts as a trampoline, because in their world anything that could potentially like pop up or down acts as like a trampoline in this game's world. And then you'll pop up and then go onto like power lines and grind on the power lines, and then you can actually drop down, so like your character is hanging from the power lines while grinding like they're holding onto a hook or something. Game is just nothing but kinetic fast motion, and that's what makes it feel so good when you're controlling it. And Wind Waker, they don't have any of that. It's just sailing, but it still feels good. And I'm just very impressed by how good the art direction is to not make it feel boring when you do that.
Yeah.
Now, I understand some people will feel bored doing it, but I didn't. I just didn't. And that's really impressive to me that they were able to find that balance.
I'd put Wind Waker in a very small section of games, which I would not call it perfect, but of the games that I think are as close to perfect as you're ever going to get. Wind Waker, I don't think really has many flaws, and it does everything it wants to do very well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would say its biggest flaw is, at least in the original version, there's two things. One, the constant need to change wind direction, which wouldn't be a problem if you didn't have to stop, play your Wind Waker baton, and play the song that changes the direction of the wind, which they do fix with the Swift Sail, excuse me, in HD. The other issue I have is the Triforce shard pieces, because in order to get the Triforce shards, you need to find all the Triforce shard maps. You can find the Triforce shard maps kind of all over the place. Once you find a Triforce shard chart, you need to take them to Tingle, who can decipher them for 398 rupees each. Link will have to pay Tingle a total of 3,184 rupees to decipher all 8 charts. If you get the second wallet upgrade, then you can pay the entire lump sum at once. I did hear that like maybe you couldn't get that second wallet upgrade before the Tingle thing. I don't think that's true though, because the wiki says that you can get it. In Wind Waker HD, they did fix it where 5 of the charts are removed and replaced with the Triforce shards themselves. So they do remove a whole bunch that you don't have to do, because normally you have to get 8 different pieces. Now in HD remake, you only have to pay for 3 of the charts, as opposed to having to pay for all 8, which is insane. And that's where I got stuck at in the original game, because I couldn't find any of the wallet upgrades, so I would have to go hunt to get money. By the time I got to Tinkle, I only had enough for I think one chart. So then I'd have to go rupee hunting and grinding to get rupees just to go get another chart one. And I didn't. I don't. I think my max was like 500 at the time. I don't think I had the 5,000 rupee wallet, so I couldn't even fucking do anything. So it took. Oh my gosh! It took forever. I absolutely hate it. And looking at what the wiki says, two unnamed wallet upgrades appear in the Great Sea in Wind Waker in either order. One can be found on Outset Island after you get the bombs, which you definitely get before the chart. And another can be found in the giant boulder in Fairy Woods.
Yeah, that's fair. I forgot about that little bit.
I mean, those were my biggest gripes with it, but I would say, like, more than anything, the visuals, the graphics, that's the same fucking thing. The visuals, the music, the visuals, the music, the overall gameplay, like the way they kind of introduce different mechanics to you as the game goes on, and then they iterate on those mechanics as time goes on. Even with the boss that I mentioned before, you practice with to get up there. You have to practice using your grappling hook the whole way up to platform your way up to them. Use platforming mechanics to get up to there, and that teaches you how to use the hook shot or the grappling hook. And you might even have to use it a little bit under pressure because there are some like flying enemies and shit that come after you. So I like how the game like kind of it does a good job at teaching the players mechanics in like a really simple but effective order. Also, shout out to the Tinkle Tuner. I thought that was always kind of cool. You could connect your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, and you can take control of Tingle. I don't know exactly. I never really got to do that because I didn't have a Game Boy Advance or a GameCube back when they were contemporary, and I don't have the connecting cable to do it anyway.
I never had the cable. I had everything else, just not the cable.
I don't know what benefit it would be to take control of Tingle, but I guess you could do it. I'd be very curious about that. And then Wind Waker HD, the Tingle Tuner was replaced with the Tingle Bottle, and it's an item used to send messages to other player through the Miiverse, which is now dead, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. If I thought back and played through again, I'd probably find like some minor things like that, which they are pretty inconvenient. I don't think they're big issues, but I can see them frustrating somebody.
I think in the original game that like realistically like the biggest issue is just the Triforce shards. I think you can get over the wind thing. It's tedious, but it's not like the worst. There's modern games that have tedium like that. Yeah. And if you are smart with which direction you blow the wind, then you don't have to do it nearly as often. That's just a little tedious. I do think the Triforce shards are like no ifs, ands, or buts a poorly designed section of the game because they charge so much for those Triforce shard charts just for Tingle to translate them for you, and like that unless you have the $5,000 rupee wallet, it's so hard to do. And on top of that though, you don't get the 5,000 rupee wallet until later in the game, even if you get it before this. So the likelihood of you having enough rupee, you probably would have had enough rupees saved up by this point if you had the large wallet right from the get-go, but you don't have it right from the get-go. So you have to like still grind to get rupees before you get there. I don't know. I think that is an unnecessary bottleneck in the game. And it's a necessary bottleneck because they fucking changed it in the HD remake.
Not every decision they've ever made has been a good one.
I'll give you not that. Always. Not always.
Nintendo has made some questionable decisions randomly at times.
What console manufacturer and game developer hasn't? Cough, cough, PS5 Pro.
I just found out about that today. I can't even be mad. What do you expect from Sony these days?
It has been their business strategy since the PS1 and since the PS2, really. They just constantly are pushing the most powerful system you can possibly have for each generation. And eventually you're just going to start getting diminishing returns on that. That's why I think...
The PS2 was the weakest. That's the weird thing. It was weaker than both of its competitors. Both GameCube and Xbox were stronger, yet remember, PS2 did better.
remember the PS2 came out a year prior to GameCube and
Yeah.
Xbox. So they had GameCube and Xbox had more time to react to what Sony was doing.
I think the point here, though, is you think they'd realize that's not important because, again, that was the best selling system. It beat both Xbox and GameCube. It was the weakest system.
Yeah, but like I
Obviously, you
would
think
say
they would know you don't need to be the strongest.
I'd have to look at the timeline for when Xbox and GameCube announced the specs for their hardware, but by the time they would have, Sony would have had everything solidified. Say they announced the specs for their hardware a year out from, like, say Xbox and Nintendo announced the specs a year out. The PS2 would have been in production already. Like they couldn't have changed everything. I bet you if they would have known, they probably would have pushed a little bit further with it. If you think about it, their competition at the time was the Nintendo 64 and the Sega Dreamcast. The PS2 was leaps and bounds better than the N64, and it was pretty significantly better. Not obviously nearly as big as compared to the N64, but it was still better than the Dreamcast. Xbox and Nintendo already saw what Sony was doing, so they went with a more powerful system, and it didn't work for them, which is why Nintendo pivoted hard to the
Well,
Wii.
I wouldn't
And
say
what
it
do you
didn't
know?
work for Nintendo because GameCube still succeeded. They still made money off of it.
Oh yeah, it still succeeded, but
What they
it
would hope
wasn't a
for.
flop, but it wasn't a success either. It was kind of almost like a net neutral. It seemed. I shouldn't say that. It definitely succeeded, but by comparison to the Super Nintendo and like if you look at console sales, it just actually I think did the GameCube sell better than the N64? Hold on, I'm gonna look that up real quick.
Going to say yes,
I'm gonna look it
but
up real quick, and
I do
I'll
not
let
say
you
that with
know.
confidence.
Let's see here. Nintendo 64 sold 32.93 million units. GameCube sold 21.74. It sold 10 million less. If you look at like where the GameCube's at, the Xbox sold more than it even. The Xbox sold more than the GameCube. Obviously, the PS2 did. That's not even a question. So the NES started with 61.91 million units sold. This is all according to Wikipedia, mind you. Super Nintendo was 49.1 million. N64 was 32.93, and then the GameCube was 21.74. Definitely not a failure, but to put it in perspective, it only sold about 7 million units more than the Wii U, which is
Which
still a lot.
that
That's
was
a
a
lot. Don't get me
failure
wrong.
there.
That was a failure. So I always think it's interesting because Sony has really always tried to push fidelity and graphics. So, I mean, regardless of if it was the most powerful system at the time, that like their big thing was pushing Metal Gear Solid 2, the tech demo for that, because everyone was like, "Holy shit! Look at those graphics! Look at all the different physics you can do with it." Blah blah blah. And then obviously the PS3. That I mean, it ended up selling more than the Xbox 360, but it's still like in terms of popularity, it didn't do as well at the time. Um, and then obviously you had the big debacle of the $600 or was it 700 when it launched.
Oh, for the PS3,
Yeah, I'm blanking on it.
I forget, but it was rough.
It was 600 US dollars for the North American version,
I
which
think
is just bonkers.
I think if we have learned anything, if Sony is incapable from learning from its successes.
Yeah. I mean
That is
really,
the history of Sony. Like, this
cuz
worked. Let's never do it again.
well the PS5 is a weird one because it's selling okay. Like it's so far the PS5 is up to 61.7 million according to Wikipedia. But the PS4 is the fifth best selling console of all time, which is 117.2 million units.
And everything
And
that made that work, they just didn't do again.
yeah,
I
they
don't get it.
it's so strange to me, man. It's absolutely bonkers to me how they do it. The Switch is closing in though. It's right now it's at 143.42 million, so it's got less than 10 million to tie the PS2. No, sorry, 12. It's a little more than 10 million to tie the PS2 at 155. It is interesting to see what Sony's doing, but Nintendo switched over to obviously trying gimmicks, and I don't hate that, bizarrely enough. The Wii was its own thing, then the
Yeah.
Wii U, and now the Switch. They're experimenting with different ways to play as opposed to just focusing on graphical fidelity. Sony is focusing on graphical fidelity, and then Xbox is just trying to focus on services, hence why Game Pass and all that other stuff. Anyway, I've digressed us into a crazy topic.
That's fine. Because I think we're starting to kind of wrap up all of our thoughts on Wind Waker.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say on my own. Like, if I was covering this on my show, I would have liked to had more time to play it. Did a bunch of research beforehand, just to
So,
get the feel of it, get that sailing
yeah.
vibe again. And man, I missed that game. I miss this game. It's a lot of fun.
I will bring one other thing up. It's not Wind Waker related. Are you at all familiar with the 64 recompile projects that have been going on?
I don't
Now,
think so.
I don't know how much you've ever kept up on emulation, but Nintendo 64,
Hmm.
for reasons that have never been adequately explained to me, emulating the Nintendo 64, even to this day, has been very difficult. There's
Yeah.
better PS3 emulators than there are Nintendo 64 emulators. Now, one thing someone or people started doing ages ago is they basically create PC ports of the games. Now, this is very hard to do because you effectively need to reverse engineer the source code. Especially if you don't actually have the source code for a game, this is an incredibly time consuming prospect. A guy found a way to automate the majority of that process.
Yeah, to automate the source code, right? To
Yeah,
automate getting the source
you
code.
can
Yeah,
basically get the
he
ROM into the recompiler and have most of it done within days.
that's wild. I heard about that
Yep.
like a year ago. I remember hearing about that or something. That's amazing. It's the homebrew and the emulation community is
Oh,
insane. Shout out to my buddy Cade from the Gaming Memories podcast. He does a lot of stuff with emulation and emulators, and he kind of tinkers around
yeah.
with them and does you know, gets upscaled texture packs and all these other different things, and it's crazy.
I bring this up because we have like the full source code for Majora's Mask. I've actually ran through with that compiler. Like, you still need the ROM. You put that in the compiler after you've downloaded it. Majora's Mask right now with this runs like a dream.
Oh,
It is
that's awesome.
so smooth. The upscale graphics look so fantastic. It does make
But
you wonder why couldn't Nintendo have done this? They're
well, I mean, it costs time and money to do that, and it's not going to make
yeah,
it. The whole thing is that it just does not make them enough money to
yeah.
warrant it.
It's so good. Like, it plays. This is the best way to play Majora's Mask, bar none.
Mm.
Even more so than if you have the original 64 in front of you and plugged in. It just looks so good.
It's cool that people have been able to do that, and they've been able to figure shit out like that. I'm not surprised Nintendo doesn't do it, but that goes into a whole other conversation about like game preservation and listen, I'm not saying like upscaling and like modding an old game is preservation, but like unfortunately ROMs and emulation are doing a better job at
Yeah.
preserving game history than the people who
Yeah.
make the video games are currently.
Oh, and mind you, you can play Majora's Mask or this recompiler just as the original. You don't need to upscale it if you don't want to. So the original experience is entirely intact. But
Oh yeah,
yes,
because you can play it on the Switch. You can, there's a
it's
lot, which isn't great, but you can do it.
that's
But
the
then
worst way to
obviously you
play
can.
right now. Is
I
Switch
mean,
Online.
it's the easiest way because, don't get me wrong, I would prefer to
Yeah,
play on original hardware or on the 3DS remake, unless you are willing to spend the money. If you don't already own it, unless you're
yeah,
willing to spend the money for an N64 and the physical copy of it, or a 3DS, which are I think kind of pricey now in the
yeah.
aftermarket because ever since Nintendo stopped making them, they can be it can be hard to get. So if you have a Switch, you can at least have an easy way to get access to it. And the emulation's not great, but it's not awful.
Nintendo hasn't exactly had the best of history with their online servers.
What are you talking about? What do you
it's,
mean? They're great. It's so
it's
easy and not obtuse in the slightest.
Nintendo frustrates me right now. I
What
think
do you
they're the
mean I need to
best.
turn
The-
what do you mean I need to turn my Switch into a Wi-Fi hotspot so I can send it through a QR code to my phone just to get a screenshot? Have you ever done that? Have you ever tried to like share a screenshot from your Switch to out like off to offload it to something else?
The only times I did it was when you could like link your Twitter directly to the Switch, and I do the screenshots. That was easy to do, but
Yeah, if you want to like save the image file to your phone or to your computer, I think you even have to do it to your phone. I don't even think you can technically send it to your computer. I mean, you probably could. I don't know. You basically you turn on a Wi-Fi hotspot. You basically say, "I want to share this image," and then a QR code pops up. What that QR code then does is that it gives you a Wi-Fi signal to connect to, and you connect your Wi-Fi to it, and you have to make sure though that you're paying attention to the password on the screen, because otherwise it will not work, and because it might keep the previous password that you used for the Switch
oh
hotspot,
god.
and that password changes every single time you want to export something to it. Then you connect to it, which then shows up another QR code on the Switch, which you scan again, and that will take you to the web page that is now connect. Now that you're connected to your Switch, it will take you to the web page for that has the screenshot that you can then press and hold on your phone to download the image to your phone.
I'm not gonna lie, I tuned those steps out halfway through.
I don't blame you.
it's
I'm sure the audience did too. It was riveting podcasting right there.
it's I remember looking up the screenshot stuff before I realized I could just link my Twitter, and I was like, nope, that's too much work.
It's I
it's,
figured it out because I try to keep track of the games I've beaten. I've been this year I've been trying to keep track of the games I've beaten on my Twitter account and on my Blue Sky account, and I
I keep
admittedly I was
forgetting about my
off.
Blue Sky account.
I use it to share things, but I'm barely active on it. But in any case, I admittedly I have not been able. I have not been keeping up with my games I beat count for quite some time. How many games have I beaten this year? I'm gonna have to
I haven't
scroll
beaten
back.
nearly enough.
This year I've been doing pretty well. Well, I guess we should we do our final thoughts on Wind Waker?
Oh yeah, we're way off tangent right there. Windwaker.
Yeah, this is what you get with me. I have it. If you ask me to talk about like especially like game history and stuff like that, I will go off on tangents.
Oh, you should have heard. You should listen to me and John talk about Final Fantasy IX. There's some weird tangents in that one.
I love Final Fantasy IX, man. I think that's my favorite Final Fantasy game.
I have dressed up as both Kefka and Kuja.
You've cosplayed as both Kefka and Kuja.
Yeah.
Kuja's a great villain.
Oh, he's my favorite. Like nine's my favorite Final Fantasy, followed by 6. I would suggest if you are ever in Houston, do not dress up as Kefka in the middle of an extreme heat warning.
I definitely wouldn't do that.
It's the one day there was an extreme heat warning happened to be the day I dressed up as Kefka. it was rough. But yes, final thoughts on Wind Waker.
It's fucking great. Go play it. There we go.
So good.
I kept it short.
Again, I think it's about as close to perfect as you're ever going to get in a game. It clearly isn't perfect,
Yeah,
but I don't think you can get closer.
No, I think it's a fantastic game. I really, really, really love it, and I really think if for those who have not played it, it's definitely worth your time. Worth your time, excuse me. It's a really fun game.
Well, that said, we'll wrap up this episode of the Tribunal, and I will see you here next time with Mrs. Riona to talk about Digimon. And something I'm going to be tagging on to the end because I forgot to do this at the beginning of this show. What is your podcast?
After I passive aggressively called it out, no, my podcast is the Still Loading podcast. You can find it where all good podcasts are given for free. Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, all that good stuff. Yeah, if you like video game history and deep dives and interviews with people in the industry, I do all those things. I've interviewed Gary Chalk, who's a voice actor. He's done. He was also, if you're like Beast Wars, he was in Beast Wars. I've interviewed Sissy Jones, who was in Firewatch. I've interviewed Austin Wintory, who's the composer for Journey, an Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and a couple other. Like he's done a lot of video game stuff. But people from the industry like that, I always like to shout those out. I do deep dives on individual games. Like I said, that's where I kind of talk about the history. I try to make a approachable version of like looking at video game history for a specific game while also talking about the themes of the game and what I think, what me and my guests think about the mechanics. And then I do weird shit like the Final Fantasy Draft, which is what happens when you take Final Fantasy and fantasy sports and mash them together. You don't need to know anything about fantasy sports to enjoy it. So yeah, it's a good time. That is the Still Loading podcast, and you can find it on all those places.
I think this is the first time I've actually forgot to ask my guests to plug their show. I normally do it at the
I
very
see how it
beginning.
is. No, it's all good.
Look, I
It's
had
all
to
good.
forget at some point.
I'm glad I could be your first. There we go.
All right, so we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.